Hey everyone, it's Nightlight9, and in this video I'm going to be going over the newest Limit Break banner featuring Aerith and Bahamut Rod, and we're going to get right to it. So, first thing I want to go over is her costume, Bahamut robe, and it is very, very good. Boost attack on all allies, very similar to Cloud and Yuffie, so you're going to get plus 10% or plus 10 to physical and magical attack and plus 5% to both of those. That's a big deal. Bahamut's protection, though, is what really makes this shine. Physical and magical defense plus 20%. This is identical to Electro armor for Barrett, and everybody, I think, has at least considered getting that from the gear voucher if they didn't have it because it's that good. But down here, the difference being where Barrett has physical and magical attack plus 10%, Aerith has healing potency plus 10%, which I really like, because I feel like Aerith, at least for me, is used primarily for utility and healing, so I really like this extra 10% healing potency. And where Barrett's has HP up here, this has boost attack all allies. I think this robe is a definite worthwhile pickup if you like to play Aerith. However, let's look at Bahamut's Rod now. This one is interesting, and the first thing, we'll go over the C ability here. So Magic Heal all allies, so very similar to Fairy Tail, for example, but less overall healing potency along the entire way. Next, you have physical defense increase for all allies. The good thing is, Aerith doesn't really have access to a good version of this on a weapon that does more things, so this is a big deal. However, max potency being mid is a bit of a downer, and we'll get into that because when you compare it to Matt's Centipede, his goes up to high potency. So probably initially the biggest thing that's a little bit of a drawback or a letdown or disappointment or whatever you want to call it is that. Now, this last ability is interesting as well. It's basically a boost ATB by 1 to everybody except for her, so your other 2 allies. And it's an HP threshold ability that is inverse to the rest of the HP thresholds that we've seen. So for this, you have to be under whatever that percentage is. Under 90% at OB10 makes it quite easy to use. However, at 5-star, it's 40%. Makes it a little bit trickier to get that out of it. And I think that this is, I don't know, it's probably really good. I mean, I haven't been able to test it. And then before you get to test a weapon, it's kind of hard to really evaluate how good something like this is, how much of an impact it will have. I can say with 40% or less HP, probably kind of hard to get this to work as much as you want. But coming up to OB6, 70% or less, that seems fairly easy to get off. And at OB10, you're going to get it off most of the time, I would say, if you're using an AoE heal. Let's go ahead and look at the card that Tom Rom made showing 5-star to OB1. You can see here, most noteworthy, I think, is instead of 42% heal, you get 50% heal. You get an extra 4-second duration on the physical defense up. It's still low potency, stacks to mid, and you also get an extra 10% HP threshold, which I think is actually kind of a big deal. I think it's, you know, you probably don't want your characters typically under 50% HP. I think that's normally what's going to signal that you need to use that heal. So I do think that that's something. The R abilities are, you know, slightly increased, but nothing dramatic. But it's what we would expect out of OB1, and so I think that, you know, if you're going to get a copy, it's perfectly fine to pick up 2 copies. The next thing we're going to look at is the chart for Aerith's weapons and kind of looking at how this weapon fits in with what Aerith has in general. So it highlighted in purple here is the Bahamut Rod, and then all the other, you know, weapons are listed as well. Now, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this chart because, you know, there is a lot of information we do have. You can probably pick up a copy of it in our Discord. I don't know if it's just made accessible to everybody, but if you are on there and you hit up Tom Rom, he would give you a copy of this, I'm sure. However, it's helpful, you know, just generally comparing it to other weapons. You can see that Mithril Rod is the only other one, I believe, that gives physical defense up to everybody. However, it doesn't have a heal on it. It doesn't have anything super special going on for it in other areas either. So as far as our abilities and stuff, it really doesn't compare. The magic attack that's kind of something I'll be focusing on. And so we're going to move on from this now. So looking at this weapon, I think it's easy to dismiss it. And honestly, I spent at least 20 minutes just kind of staring at this, thinking about it, wondering like, man, is this even really worth pulling for? Because it's not what I was hoping for. I'll be honest with you. I think maybe the fact that this physical defense doesn't go to high is really a big thing. And overall, at first glance, what I think the problem is it felt like, compared to what Yuffie's weapon does for her, giving her access to a high damage, single target, physical non-elemental damage type, Cloud's giving him, that massive AoE hit and the flat damage, which I can tell you from using is really, really nice to have. Those did big things for those characters, where Aerith doesn't feel at first like it does. However, I'm going to compare it to Centipede because I think that's what everybody's going to want to do. And then I'm going to make the case for why I think this weapon is better than it seems on the surface. So here we're looking at a direct comparison for Centipede and Bahamut Rod. And Centipede is an amazing weapon. One of the reasons it's so amazing is because it has an AoE heal, which if you compare it at this chart, right, 5-star to OB1 all the way down to OB10, you'll see they have identical healing potencies. However, it gives at OB6, right, one cast is a high potency physical defense buff to your entire party. And that is a big deal. Aerith's Rod here only gives mid potency. The one thing that's not mentioned in this chart though is that even at OB10, Centipede only gives a 14-second buff for that physical defense, whereas Aerith's Rod at OB10 is 20 seconds. And that extra 6 seconds is kind of a big deal, especially when you're looking at buff debuff extension and things of that nature. So I wouldn't shortchange it too much because an extra 6 seconds, I mean, it really could matter. Because for example, if you had 100% buff extension, you're looking at 12 extra seconds instead of 6. So I think you can kind of see where that would play out. Gives ATB to allies. Aerith does that. Mats does not. Again, I'm not certain how strong that's going to be. I know it's pretty decent, but I don't know if it's like broken or anything like that. Kira plus 20% slot. They both have that. Asuna all. That's going to be one of the main things that I'm focusing on for why I think this weapon is so good, along with the magic attack all. I think those are really big. Now, Centipede has a much better boost heal R ability, which makes it, generally speaking for healers, a better sub-weapon, and for a healer, a better main weapon in that capacity. It also has buff debuff extension, which I think is really nice, and it's not limited. So in theory, normally it would be easier to OB6. However, I do think with the extra rate up on this banner and the guaranteed copies, it shouldn't be that difficult to get either OB6 or close to OB6, especially if you're okay going through 2 cards. If we look down here and we see this Asuna all, I think this is a pretty big deal, much bigger than it seems at first glance, because when I think of some of the more challenging content and think about maybe the future, how they decide to make certain content challenging, one of the things that is really easy to make your life tough is by, either silencing or blinding, darkness to your allies, right? Because that can present a big problem, especially when they do that right before a sigil break phase or something like that. Now, obviously, you could just cast 2 Asunas, but you are wasting ATB, and so if there's ever a reason where you need to do that and start breaking sigils with Aerith, or that and a heal, something like that, I do think that this Asuna all is a pretty big deal, because it's one cast to clear everybody's status ailment for whatever materia you put on there. That is one thing that I think is going to be very underrated for this. The other thing I don't think is underrated, but I do want to make an appeal to, is that the boost magic attack on this obviously is worth picking up just to have as a sub weapon, especially if you don't have the ones from the 6-month anniversary. However, because this weapon can do so many things in the main hand, I think this is going to be it's going to be able to be utilized more often because you can put this in Aerith's main hand and give the flat, stat of whatever, whatever tier you have this at, right? It'll be 6, you're giving 40, and it's not being halved because you have it in the main hand. And for that reason, I think it is really good. The other thing, as I said, that I think is really good is it gives her access to physical defense increase to everyone, and she can still equip like Kimura Wand to then also cover boost magic defense. Now that's something we've been doing with Matt in certain fights where, he's got an AoE magic defense up, he has the physical defense up. If you bring both of those, you're covered on any of that, like if you're in a dungeon or something like that. So ultimately, I do think this is a good weapon. I am going to try to OB6 it, but my advice if you were low on crystals would be to probably wait, see what Tifa has, because that might be something you want to pull on, obviously. But in general, I plan to do a video comparing all of these 1-year anniversary weapons at the end. I do think so far Cloud's is the best and most useful. I think Aerith's right now seems to be the least useful because, well, basically because Centipede exists. And so if you're like me where Aerith is your main healer, I do think this is a great pickup and very worth it. However, if you have to be super conscientious about how you spend your crystals, the thing that I'm going to say here is you could always swap out Aerith for Matt if you need the physical defense increase. And for those of you who don't have Kimura Wand, which was also limited, you're not going to be able to cover the magic and the physical that easily either, whereas Matt really can. So I think that it is something that is not necessary. I think one copy is perfectly fine because it does stack to mid, and since it also gives the AoE heal, it's not like that big of a deal if you have to cast it twice if you feel like you need the mid potency. And the fact that it doesn't go up to high in the right circumstances, Matt's could even be more useful. So to me, I don't think this is something that I would feel is a must go for, especially if you're new and you don't have a lot of crystals or whatever your situation may be. It is something I would consider holding off on. However, I'm going for it because I believe I have enough crystals to probably clear 2 pages on 2 banners still, and I just don't use Yuffie. So that's where I am on that. The only other thing to leave off on a pretty solid note here is I am very excited, very, very excited for this, the Tifa limit break draw, and also introducing Kate Sith's limit break weapon. I'm really excited for that. I cannot wait for it. And so I think that's a pretty positive note to leave off on. I am really curious to know whether or not you guys are going to pull for this, or how hard you're going to pull for this, or if you're going to wait. What you guys think. Was it a letdown? Do you think it's pretty good, or is it undercover good? Maybe the way I've described it. Let me know. Subscribe for future content if you're not already. If you are, I appreciate each and every one of your support. And as always, thanks for watching.